So this parsha is a very exciting parsha. Lots of movement in this parsha. We have the plagues. It's like very exciting. Okay, so as you may remember from last parsha, we left off with Moshe having experienced Hashem in the burning bush. We spoke about his taking off his shoes, his being absolutely vulnerable to what Hashem was telling him. Hashem tells him he has to go and free the Jews from Egypt. He doesn't want to. He held out for a whole week, pleading with Hashem to choose somebody else. Okay, he says the Jews are not going to believe me. So Hashem gave him signs to show them. Do you know what, we didn't get to what the signs were, did we? Okay, so here are the signs which are going to be more relevant to this week than what we were talking about last week. One sign was he could throw his staff to the floor and it turned into a snake. Then he could pick it up and it turned back into a staff. The other was Hashem said, take your hand and put it inside your jacket and take it out. And he says, it's all white as though he has leprosy. Then put it back in and it comes out healed. So those were the signs he was given, not to prove himself to the Egyptians, but to prove himself to the Jews. And then Hashem says, so go and tell Paro that Israel is my firstborn son. And if you don't let him out, in the end I'll kill your firstborn son. But I'll do all sorts of miracles to do this. So he goes there. I want to talk more about the signs, but I'm going to go back in a moment. He goes there. It works. The Jews believe in him. He goes with the elders to Paro's palace, okay, and Paro won't believe him, and he makes work harder for the Jews, and this is where we left off. So Moshe had a very important sentence that came out of his mouth that sounds very un-Moshe-like. He says, how come you've behaved so badly to your people? Does that sound like Moshe? Okay. So I want to talk to you about the signs, I want to talk to you about what Moshe said, and then I want to talk to you about Hashem's responses. Moshe says the Jews won't believe me. Is that a reasonable supposition? If Moshe came today to Neve, and he said, your lives are going to be different, Mashiach's going to come, there's going to be worldwide peace, would you believe him? What would you think? No. I would think either that there's something wrong with him, you know, okay, whatever you say, just don't get physical, okay? Or that, not there's something wrong with him, but that would be a wonderful thing to happen, but I don't see it around the corner. You could see this? Yeah. Okay. So, what did Hashem expect? So I want to tell you a rule concerning the Jews. The Jews are referred to as ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim, believers, the children of believers. Meaning, when something is true, which is not always the case, but when something is true, we believe it even if it doesn't make sense. We hold on to things that don't make sense because they resonate. So I want to give you a primal example of this. The first mitzvah that any Jew was given was what? That was Jews as a group. But as an individual Jew, what was the first mitzvah? Brit Milah, right? Okay. So the vast majority of Jews do this. Okay, so I want to introduce you to Cousin Howie. Here's Cousin Howie. He could be your cousin. He could be my cousin. It doesn't matter whose cousin he is. Here's Cousin Howie. He's an assistant professor at MIT. Okay, he's my friend. I like him very much. He belongs to a Reform synagogue, which he attends twice a year. Okay, that's because his wife really thinks it's good for the children. And he doesn't think about religion one way or the other. It's like it's not in the storyline. So when he's not working, what he does is he has a motorboat and he goes out on the sound. Do you know him? Okay, so here's Howie. Okay, Mazel Tov, Melinda, that's his wife, just had a baby. When's the bris, Howie? Okay, so he's well, it looks like it'll be Thursday. Think you could make it to Massachusetts? Okay, yeah. Now suppose, instead of saying, great, what time, where, I said, why are you doing this? What would he say? Not what would I say, but what would Howie say?
Well, it's always been done.
That's how it is. The Jewish tradition.
I mean, we're Jewish, right? I mean, I'm not as religious as you, but we're Jewish, right? Yeah. Okay. So suppose I were to say, you're right, you're not as religious as me. Why are you keeping this of all things? Okay. And then I can have my whole list of what he doesn't keep. Okay, now I would never do this. I say, Howie, you're a rational thinker. Okay, like, what else do you do because your father did it? Okay, so what's the reason? And the majority of Jews, the vast majority of Dubris is on their sons. So I want to tell you something. They don't know. Got it? If you push them to the wall, they really don't know why they're doing it. Okay, clear? And if you push them too hard, then you could get them to not do it because it becomes embarrassing to them to do something they don't know. You understand what I mean? So that's why it's a bad idea to push them to the wall. But there's a part of every Jew that relates to emunah as opposed to da'at. Emunah is faith and da'at is knowledge. So faith is above knowledge, but it's not an exclusion to knowledge. So I want to point out the difference between faith and fairy tales. Okay, so here's how fairy tales work, as you know. Okay, if you have like a 4-leaf clover, like they really grow with 3 leaves, but like if you find one, it's like for sure good luck. Why should you not believe this? It's also, says who? Okay, how provable is this? Like, why are you telling me this? It's nonsense. Do people believe this kind of stuff anyway? Why? It's easy.
Because people before them believed it, told them.
Okay, because it's part of their bizarre traditions, Okay, but remember, society is a composite of the people who live in society. The reason why people will tend to grasp onto anything is because we instinctively recognize we have no control. We have no control. And there has to be something else that does, because the world is ordered. And this is a great avoidance of God. Okay, clear? So people like superstitious beliefs. There was a 20th century philosopher, Erich Fromm, who wrote a book called Escape from Freedom that was very important in its time. Did any of you hear of it? Mm-hmm. Okay, did you read it?
Freedom is in Spanish, I know.
Right, right. So the idea is people will do anything to escape freedom because freedom is very frightening. Okay, clear? So here are some other examples of escape from freedom. Imagine somebody who's a real football fan. Do you know anybody who's like a real football fan? Yeah. Okay. So do they know that nothing really will change no matter who wins? Do they know this or not? Yeah. Of course they do. But because we have a strong need, everyone has a strong need for meaning, this is what they'll do to substitute for meaning. And it's not a terrible substitute. Okay, clear? Okay, in Europe, I don't know if you probably do know this. Do you know that at football matches, periodically, there's like so much violence that there are actual murders that go on? Yeah, England, jolly old England. So this has to do with frustrated desire for meaning. Okay, so that's fairy tales. This we avoid. The Torah is replete with warnings, don't go there. Okay, clear? So what's faith then? So faith is where when you use your logic, not dismiss your logic, and you've already built certain assumptions on the basis of things that you've actually seen, you could take it a step further and be right and it'll resonate. So I'll give you an example. You've all been to the pharmacy to buy medicines, right? Yes? You've all done that? Okay. So let's say you go to the pharmacy here on Scholzen and you ask for Bayer aspirin, okay? So she says, Rega, Rega, because she's Israeli, because in Israel many people speak Hebrew. Okay, even in Har Nof. Okay, so she goes to the back and she gives you a package that says right on it, Bayer aspirin. Could she conceivably have substituted something else for the aspirins? Could she have? It's possible. They may have this whole like little printing thing in the back. Put in the LSD, let's see what happens. I'll tell her. Take 3 tablets with water. Okay, yeah. Could this happen in theory? Yeah. You all take taxis? Okay. So you get in the Tachana Merkazit, you're heading back to Har Nof, you say, Har Nof, Neve Yerushalayim. He says, sure, no problem. 2 hours later, okay. Could that happen? It could happen, but does anybody worry about this? No. I hope I didn't just ruin your life. How do I know that's really Bayer aspirin? Like, honestly, whatever. Okay. So the reason is that you've been to the store many times and you usually get what you ask for. You've been in many taxis. They usually don't take you up to Lebanon, right? Okay. So faith in God means you've seen the intricacy and beauty of the world, and you recognize the creativity of the force that made it. Okay, and you're willing to say the one who made it all knows what he's talking about. So there's a certain amount of resonance. Okay, clear? Okay, so going back to the Jews believing in Moshe, Paro believing in Moshe. So the reason why Moshe was sure that they wouldn't believe in him was because he didn't get this. He didn't get this, that for Jews, truth resonates. He would be going back to saying, but they've never seen me do anything. I've been gone for decades. They don't know me. They've been here for hundreds of years, suffering. Why should they believe me? Their experience will tell them, don't believe him. So the part of Jews that has emunah is the part of us that resonates when something is true, whether or not we could justify it. Okay, clear? So now let's look at the signs that Hashem gave him. So the first was his staff turned into a snake. Where's the first time we have a snake in the Torah? The Garden of Eden. Why did Hashem put the snake there? If you take the word for snake, nachash, and you turn it into a verb in Hebrew, lenachesh, do any of you know what that means? To guess. Le-nachesh.
Le-nachesh makes it a verb with it.
Yeah, the le makes it yeah. It means to guess. Hashem created the snake in order to create doubt, because our moral barometers have no way of working without doubt. If something is certain, there's no moral choice. So is the snake good or bad? Bad. Its purpose and existence is good, but essentially its whole purpose, its presence is bad. Okay, but the word for snake, nachash, is the same letter value as the word Mashiach, which means redeemer. We're redeemed through confronting doubt. So Moshe doubted the Jews. So Hashem, take your staff, turn it into a snake. It becomes a snake. Something that could be extremely certain could be a source of doubt. And then you could pick it up and it'll be a source of faith. But then Hashem gave him a minor punishment. So his hand became leprous and then became normal. When did people get leprosy? Under what circumstances? Lashon hara. Where was his Lashon hara? He said, the Jews will not believe me. That's Lashon hara. What's the halachic definition of Lashon hara? Something that's true and negative. Now I want you to hear this. So he was being accurate. The Jews will not believe him. This was true and negative. If it was false, it wouldn't be Lashon hara, it would be something else. So the idea of confronting doubt, and some of it stays with you, enough that the Jews wanted to believe but didn't believe. So he was completely accurate. But when he showed them the signs, that validated what they wanted to see enough that it was the source of their belief. So I want to tell you something about tzaras. Tzaras affects the skin, right? If you were writing the script and you were punishing people for Lashon hara, and you wanted them to have a physical sign that they had done the wrong thing, what limb or organ would you have chosen? The mouth, the tongue. So Hashem chose the skin, and I want to tell you why. The reason we speak Lashon hara is we see people superficially. If we were able to penetrate, then we wouldn't speak Lashon hara. Okay, so now Moshe goes to Paro, and he has another sign to show him, which was turning the water into blood. Okay, and what's Paro's response before it actually happened? He just told him he would do it, he didn't do it yet. He says, let them work harder. Okay, let them work harder, then they won't have so much nonsense. What was the effect of their working harder upon the Jews? Did Paro's plan work or not? Did they work? It worked. Yeah, their faith in Moshe was diminished because of the hard work, because all they could think about was their bodies. So at this point, Moshe didn't know what to do, and he says, why are you behaving in such a bad way to this people? So we left off last time by asking, are you supposed to question God or not? And the conclusion we raised is that there are two kinds of questions. One is the indignant rhetorical question. Where were you? Yeah. And the other is a question that's actually one in which you want an answer. Okay, where were you? It's a different thing. When Moshe said, why were you behaving so evilly to these people? It's because he really wanted to know why. The Jews have a completely different faith than other people. This is just the beginning of it. Why are we treated so much more badly than other peoples are? So Hashem's answer doesn't seem to have anything to do with the question. What was his answer?
Can you paraphrase it?
What?
No. Okay, sorry.
Okay, he said to Moshe, okay, the Avos believed in me, even though I only came to them with the name Kel Shakai, but I'm Hashem, and it's through this name that you'll know me. That doesn't seem to have anything to do with the question. I mean, it's nice, but what does it have to do with the question? So we have to talk about the level of faith that the Avos had, the level of faith that Moshe had, and these different divine names. Hashem made many promises to the Avos, and none of the promises were ever fulfilled at the moment he made them. They were fulfilled, but not at the time. So what lesson did they have to learn? To believe anyway that Hashem doesn't have to fit into your box. You have your idea of how God should behave. He should do this, and he should do that, and he should do the other. Maybe he has a different picture of reality than you do. Maybe he thinks that he should do something different than what you want. Okay, so that takes your faith to a different place. Faith is when you've already seen enough of God that you trust him. So the Avos were willing to trust Hashem. I don't understand this, but it's from you, it's from God, I trust it. So is this level higher or lower than Moshe who asked? On one level, I want you to realize, each of them knew Hashem in his own way. So Avram was attuned to Hashem's chesed, and Yitzchak said, no, there are limitations, we have to know how to deal with them. He was in tune to Midas Hadin. Yaakov was in tune to Emes. Moshe could see all of it. He could see that these different midos seemed to be conflicted. So if Hashem, in order to give us more tests, is allowing the Egyptians to make the word harder, so where's the rachamim? And if he does have rachamim, so how come this happened? You understand what I mean? So it's like a puzzle where the pieces just won't fit. So his question was not how could you do this, but how could you do this? Show me how to fit the puzzle pieces together. So Hashem did. So what did he do? He said, Ani Hashem, I am Hashem, and I do pay. But the Avos knew me through the divine name Kel Shakai, which means the force that's sufficient. So Ramban explains this. He says that the name that the Avos knew is the name that we use to describe hidden miracles. What's a hidden miracle? Meaning you could see it as a miracle, or you could not see it as a miracle. It all depends on you. Give me an example of a hidden miracle.
Rain drops.
What?
Rain.
Rain. So you can say, look at that. The little drops just fall down from the sky, not too hard to destroy the crops, but hard enough to penetrate the earth. Isn't that something? Okay, you could do that. Or you could say, this is as close as I'll ever come to actually seeing the revival of the dead. Just look at how the rain brings life to everything. You could see it either way. It's a choice. There are miracles that are open where you have really no choice but to say this is a miracle. What would that be like? Moshe stretches his hand over the Yam Suf only after Hashem told him to. And then it splits. So what are you going to say then? Well, Moshe has his timing just right. It was going to split anyway. And look, he just intuited when got this. That's very hard. So it's considered to be a higher level to see Hashem in the midst of hidden miracles than in revealed miracles, because it stretches you further. That makes sense? Okay. So the Avos then on L'chora were on a higher level in some ways than Moshe in terms of faith. Kriyat Yamsuf was huge, but people had very little choosing to do. Okay, why would Hashem want Moshe to be the vehicle of revealed miracles? What's that for? Because that's what the parsha is going to be about. So remember we said faith, legitimate faith, not foolish faith, comes from what you've already seen. The Jews have to see open miracles for them to be able to live the history that they're going to have. So what do revealed miracles teach you? The three things that you learn from open miracles are that God's definitely there. He could break all the rules. So whatever you think a rule is, he could break that. There's no such thing as an unbreakable rule. And the third thing is he's concerned with the lives of individuals. Okay, so with that, he goes to Paro's court. He has to encounter the Jews first. Did they believe him? The Jews believed him, right? Did he have to show them his stuff to get them to believe him? Not really. He showed it to them, but they believed him even first. On the basis, it says, he told them a special message. What was that? He used the words pakot pakadati. Be quiet, I keep on turning you off. Okay. Hashem told him to use the words that he promised Yosef. He said, Yosef told his brothers, one day you'll leave this land. Hashem says, we'll remember you and remember you again. So Moshe had never heard this phrase. He lived after Yosef, but the elders knew that this was passed down by tradition, that when someone comes and says, God remembered, that he knows what he's talking about.
Didn't he also have to show them the tricks with like the staff and the snake?
Yeah, he did show them. He showed them his tricks, but they were already there watching. They weren't leaving. Like they weren't like back in the house, drinking beer, eating pretzels, and so on. He goes to Paro, and he tells them the Jews have to leave, and they're God's firstborn. He gives them the whole message. What does Paro say? He says, "Who's God?" Okay. So, yeah, but he just said, what are you talking about? Who's God? So the plague of blood was the first of the three plagues we have to go through today. Okay, why did he begin with this plague? So the reason is that the Egyptians worshipped the Nile. Why do you think they worshipped the Nile?
Because it gave them life.
Gave them life. It hardly rains in Egypt, but the Nile overflows its banks once a year. So this is what really sustains them. So they saw the Nile as nurture. So they worshipped the Nile, among other things. They had a theory of religion in which various natural forces they thought were connected to spiritual powers, and that these forces themselves deserve worship. So Yaakov had given Paro a blessing. When Paro said, bless me, he blessed him, and from then on, when Paro went out to the Nile, the water would rise towards him. So what would have been the ideal response? He gets a bracha from Yaakov, and now the Nile rises towards him. What should he have thought? He spread the beliefs, I am God. Okay, it says this in prophecy. He created a whole cult around himself, saying, I'm God, I made the Nile, I am the Nile. Okay? So despoiling the Nile robbed them of any kind of credibility to their whole religious system. So this was a true open miracle, and I want to tell you why. When you think of the water turning to blood, we see clear turning to red, but you have to remember this. Blood is a protein. Water is a mineral. That means the chemicals changed completely. Okay, so the whole Nile turned to blood, but any water that the Jews could get from their own wells did not turn to blood. An Egyptian could grab a cup of water out of a Jew's hand, and it would. The Jew could grab it back, and it would. Okay, it would turn to water. How do you think people responded to this? What? They tried to buy water. They saw it as a problem to be solved. Okay, clear. How long did the plague last? A week. And then it's gone. And what do people do with things that are uncomfortable for them to believe after a week? They forget it. Okay. Okay, so Moshe returns, and he asks for the same things as he did before. And this time, the next plague that he brings about is what? Frogs. Why frogs? And how did it come about? So he said he would bring about the plague of frogs. A giant frog emerged from the Nile, and the Egyptians began to beat it. And as they beat it, more and more and more frogs came out. So you would think that they would what? Stop. But their desire to say it's under control was so great that they kept on beating. Could you understand this? Okay, so they're beating and beating and beating, and more and more frogs came out. They went all over. They went into the people's homes, in their pots, in their beds, in the stoves, every place. The word for frog in Hebrew, do any of you know the Hebrew word for frog? Tzfardea. It's actually two words that are jammed together. One is tzafar, which means to siren or proclaim, and the other is dea, which means to know. So their purpose was, with every croak they made, to proclaim knowledge of God. Okay, so this was, of course, very uncomfortable for the Egyptians. They didn't feel like they could be anywhere. So I want you to go fast forward 3,000 years. Here it is, 3,000 years later. The Jews are being expelled from Israel because of their sins. The name of the military leader who forced them out of Israel is Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Okay, like Paro, he declared himself God. Okay. Did you know, by the way, I don't know if you know this or not, did you know that the Japanese emperor in World War II declared himself God? Yeah, it's just like, this is like people don't, whatever, people don't learn. General MacArthur, who was the head of the Allied forces, made him go on the radio and say, "I'm not God," which I always thought was like so Monty Python. I mean, like, how could, saying "I'm not God," what is that supposed to even mean on the radio? But whatever. So Nebuchadnezzar proclaimed himself God. He had a symphony orchestra. The word that's used in the text is symphonion. And he measured how far you could hear them. So let's say you could hear a symphony orchestra for half a mile. Yeah? So everybody within that radius had to bow when he would pass. Okay. 3 people didn't do it. Their names were, this is good for you, Judaica trivia. Do you know their names? No, but you will now. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they wouldn't bow. And what happened next? What should logically happen next? They're arrested. They're brought before a tribunal. They're sentenced to being burned to death. They're bound by ropes. They're thrown into a fire. The ropes burn, but they don't. Okay, now here's the important part of the story. None of them were Avraham. Something like that happened to Avraham, but they weren't Avraham. They were people like us. So people said, "How did you get the courage for this, especially since nobody else was doing this?" And they said, "We learned it from the frogs in Egypt. The frogs went into the fire, into the stoves, to do God's will. The nature of frogs is to only go where it's cold and dark. But they went wherever God wanted them to go." So have you seen the book that's called The Nature Poem? The Nature, it's not called poem, what is it called? Song, Nature Song. Look in the library for it. It has verses from Tehillim and elsewhere that are like the literal statement of various things in nature. So it'll have like a horse, what does it say? The sun, what does it say? Yeah. So the idea is that everything proclaims God's power in one way or the other. The only beings that could deny God are us humans. Okay? Everything else has consciousness in its own way, at its own level. So that's what the frogs came from. Okay? Next thing that happened, the frogs are there again for a week. Okay, and then no proclamations, nothing. Then out of the blue, there's lice, without warning. And this is how all of the plagues went till the end. 2 with warning and 1 without. The lice were different than the other 2, than blood and frogs. What was the difference? You should know this. The magicians couldn't copy it. The reason they couldn't copy it was that they're too small. Have any of you, I shouldn't ask you this, all right. Have any of you seen lice? You've been in Israel a while. Have you had or seen lice yet? Gives you something to look forward to, doesn't it? Okay. So lice doesn't come from dirt, by the way. People think it comes if you don't wash your hair, you'll get lice. Lice comes from what? Do you know? Other people who have lice, who someone picked it up from an animal. Okay, got this? So when you're on the bus, on the train, standing next to someone in the dining room, okay, if I can have a good day, okay. Okay, so the lice that they had in Egypt were unlike the lice we have now. They had to strike the earth to get the lice, and they were 2 feet deep in lice.
Ew.
They would like walk on lice, which is like horrible. What? Yeah, frogs are like the plagues get worse. Okay, well, okay. So the Egyptians were completely covered with this stuff, and their magicians couldn't do a thing. So the reason is that the magicians don't have dominion over things that are very small. Okay, why do you, like lice are very small. That's actually the reason why I asked you if you ever saw one. They're very small. Okay, so why do you think that they could change a staff to being a snake, but they can't do anything with something small? What is there about smallness? So the world is really composed of things that are so small that we don't even see them. Is this true? Okay, so what's being revealed here is that when you go small, Hashem's presence is more and more clearly there than in the world of the big. So I'll give you an example. Okay, subatomic particles, do they have an order or they don't have an order?
Yes.
Subatomic? No, they don't. There's a sort of dance around there, but atomic particles do. Does anybody know how that happens? No. Okay, are there all different kinds of atoms, or do they have both, or do they basically have the same components? They have only the same. How many components are we talking about?
3 and then subatomic.
What?
3 and then subatomic.
That's right. Then 8, yeah. Okay, so everything you see has 3 components. Look at the variations on life. So the idea that Moshe was trying to get across to them by bringing the lice was that whatever you see externally is nothing in terms of its intricacy and connection to God, to what you don't see. Okay, so this is the end of the first series. There were 3 series. Each one had 3 except for the last that had 4. So all of the series have in common that one will be in order to make them feel like strangers in their own homes. Another will be to put them financially in a disadvantaged place. And the third will be to cause them physical pain. So in this one, which was which? With blood, lice, and frogs, which was which? The frogs turned them into strangers in their own homes. There was no place that they could feel any respite. So they go home and go to bed, there were frogs in their beds. Okay, and they had to buy water from the Jews. Okay, so when you have to buy something, that means you have no property, no ownership, no control. So being that vulnerable gave them a taste of what slavery is. Okay, clear? So the fact that they were repaid in this way, what does that tell us? They were repaid with exactly what God said they would end up doing to us. They turned us into strangers, they afflicted us physically, and they oppressed us. So they're being punished measure for measure. What is that supposed to tell us? It's supposed to tell you that Hashem was involved all along. He didn't just come in now. He was involved all along. All of the places where we were saying, well, where is he? He was there. He clearly was aware of it because the people were being punished measure for having perpetrated this. If you really integrate this, with most of us have a great deal of trouble doing, then you'll realize that whatever you observe in life, it's still Hashem. There's no place where you could say he's not here. There may be times when his presence is more evident or less evident. But he's always there, even in the least interpretable situations. When you have this first series, so something happened within Paro. Instead of saying, who's God, he said something else. What do you think he would say? So you got into the saying yes, but then not doing it mode. Are you familiar with this? Okay, so what was he thinking when he said yes and then really didn't do it? Yes, I'll let the Jews go. Well, actually, no, I rethought it. Hashem hardened his heart, for sure. But I want you to understand how this goes. When he said it, he meant it. But when he said no, he also meant it. That meant he himself was fragmented in terms of what his desires were. So he wanted redemption from this kind of living death he was putting his people through, but he didn't want to relinquish control. So then we get up to the place where after the 5th plague, it'll say again and again and again, and God hardened Pharaoh's heart. So you can think, oh, so it's God's fault. Pharaoh deserves, he deserves fish and chips for supper. He's a good guy. He was just like a victim of God. Do people think like this? So suppose you were to get somebody who were to say, but you have to see him as a whole person. What was his childhood like? Okay, what were the people he was exposed to as he was growing up like? What was his experience with that? Could you picture somebody buying into he's not so bad?
Mm-hmm.
Is this true or false?
It's both right.
That's
Yes,
right.
It's a whole picture of a person, but also it's bad.
You've got it. There are two things going on, exactly. And we tend to go for one or the other, which never gives us an accurate picture of anything. Both things are true. It was a horrific, horrible thing, but he's a human being, and he came to this without necessarily planning it in advance. When he was 6, he wasn't saying, this is who I want to be. Okay, so with that in mind, Paro made choices. His choices included enslaving an entire people for gain. Okay, his choices included saying, who's God, when he knew better. But past a certain point, things domino out of the person's control. Okay, clear? So if it wasn't for his having made bad choices to begin with, he wouldn't have ended up where they were. So if we were to take this to this awful person, what's his name again?
Michael Vick.
Michael Vick, okay. Somewhere along the line, his choices probably got out of control. Could you see where this is so? So without knowing anything about him, I'm pretty sure when he was 6, if somebody would have said, this is what you'll do, would he would say yes or no? No. Probably when he was 15. Was he already halfway there? Maybe, maybe not, right? When he was 25, was he halfway there? For sure. I mean, somewhere between 15 and 25, he made choices that made this possible. Once it's possible, then it's automatic. Okay, clear? You can see where this is so? Okay, so this is how it was with Paro. So this happened to Paro both because he deserved it and because we needed to see all the miracles. But it also teaches us something. What does it teach us? This is extremely important for you to get. You ready? The biggest choices you'll make are made by the smallest choices you'll make. And this goes for bad and it goes for good.